A futures prop trader posts his best month ever, 6 figures on a funded account, verified statements, the whole thing. The comments are exactly what you'd expect. What indicator? What strategy? What broker? What setup? Almost nobody asks the one question that actually explains what happened. Nobody asks what he stopped doing. That's the question this video answers. Not what he added to get his best month, what he removed. Because when you actually pull apart the statements, the trade logs, and the 11 months that came before it, the best month wasn't caused by a discovery. It was caused by a subtraction, and once you see what got subtracted, you'll recognize the exact same thing sitting in your own trading right now. This matters more in prop trading than almost anywhere else in the industry, because prop firms have made best month content into its own genre. Screenshots of a payout email, a verified statement pinned to a profile, a caption implying some hidden edge finally clicked into place. The entire genre trains viewers to go looking for the thing that was added, the new strategy, the new mentor, the new piece of software. Because that's the story that sells courses and gets engagement. Nobody builds a content series around, I stopped doing something I'd been doing for 8 months. It doesn't have the same thumbnail, but it's almost always the actual answer, and it's the answer this video is going to spend the next 20 minutes proving with real trade log data instead of a vibe. I'm going to call him Jake, because his name doesn't matter and the pattern is what matters. Jake had been trading a funded futures account for just over a year before his best month happened. 2 prior evaluations failed. The first evaluation ended on day 9 of a 30-day window, blown out by a single oversized position on a jobs report morning he told himself he wouldn't trade. The second evaluation actually passed. But the funded account that followed got pulled 2 months later for hitting the daily loss limit during a news release. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the same category of mistake, dressed up slightly differently, showing up a second time on a real account instead of an evaluation. By his own account, month 11 of that funded account looked on paper almost identical to month 4. Same instrument, same rough time of day, same core setup he'd been trading the entire time, and yet month 11 produced more profit than the previous 10 months combined. Here's the uncomfortable part, and it's the part every prop firm trader watching this needs to sit with. His strategy did not get better. When you compare his written trading plan from month 4 to his written trading plan from month 11, they are close to identical. Same entry criteria, same instrument, the same E-mini contract he'd traded from day 1, same basic risk percentage per trade written at the top of the document. If the strategy had already been good enough to produce a best month back in month 4, the obvious question is why it took 7 more months to actually show up. The strategy was never the bottleneck. Jake was. It's not that Jake lacked a good system. It's not that he lacked market knowledge. By month 11, he could recite the personality of that contract's opening range better than most people can recite their own phone number. It's not that he lacked discipline in the abstract sense either. He genuinely believed every single month that he was being disciplined. The real villain was something almost nobody names directly in prop trading content. Jake was executing a good strategy through an inconsistent nervous system, and no amount of strategy refinement was ever going to fix a delivery problem. Let's actually open the trade logs, because this is where the story stops being generic and starts being useful. Think of the trade log the way an aviation investigator thinks of a flight data recorder. Nobody explains a crash by asking the pilot how confident he felt. They pull the black box and look at what the instruments actually recorded, second by second, regardless of what story the pilot remembers afterward. Jake's memory of his first 4 months was, I was being pretty disciplined, just working out the kinks. His trade log tells a different story entirely. Months 1 through 4, Jake's plan calls for a maximum of 3 trades per session on the futures contract, with a hard stop on daily loss at 1% of the funded account. Looking at the actual execution data instead of the plan, month 1 shows an average of 5.2 trades per session. Month 2, 6.1. These aren't wildly different setups being taken. They're the same setup, re-entered after a stop out. Because in the moment, a loss didn't feel like information. It felt like an interrupted trade that deserved a second attempt. The daily loss limit gets hit 4 separate times across those first 4 months. And on 2 of those occasions, Jake is trading a 4th or 5th position of the day when it happens. Positions the written plan never called for. On one of those 2 days, the trade log shows 3 re-entries on the identical setup within a 90-minute window, each one slightly worse than the last. Each one taken with what Jake described afterward as one more shot at getting it back. Months 5 through 8 tell a different kind of story. Trade frequency actually comes down closer to the plan's stated maximum. But a new problem shows up in the data that isn't visible anywhere in the P&L summary, only in the time-stamped trade log. Winning trades during this stretch are held for an average of 11 minutes. Losing trades are held for an average of 31 minutes. Same strategy, same stated target, and stop distances on paper. But in practice, winners get cut early out of a fear of giving profit back, and losers get held long past the stop because closing them feels like admitting the read was wrong. The math of that asymmetry alone is enough to turn a positive expectancy strategy negative, without a single bad setup being taken. Something shifts by month 10. The trade log for month 10 shows winning trades held for an average of 18 minutes and losing trades held for an average of 19. Almost even. Not because Jake got better at predicting which trades would work. His win rate across the entire 11 months barely moves, sitting in a narrow band the whole time. The number that moves is how symmetrically he treats being right and being wrong. That single number, the near equal average hold time between winners and losers, is the actual fingerprint of what changed. Everyone in the comments wants to know what indicator he added. The honest answer, visible only in the timestamps, is that he stopped treating winning trades and losing trades like they deserved. 2 different emotional responses. Let's name the specific failures sitting underneath those 11 months, because he got more disciplined is not an explanation. It's a slogan, and slogans don't help the person watching this who's currently living inside month 4. Failure number 1, re-entry as emotional repair. Every time Jake got stopped out early in those first 4 months, the very next thing he usually did was look for a way back into a similar position within the same session. This wasn't analysis, it was an attempt to undo the discomfort of the loss by immediately proving the read had been correct after all. The plan said 3 trades. The nervous system said finish what you started. The nervous system won almost every time, because the plan was just words on a document and the discomfort was happening right now. What makes this failure so easy to miss from the outside is that each individual re-entry looked defensible in isolation. Taken one at a time, none of them looked like recklessness. It was only when you lined up all 5 trades from a single session end to end that the pattern became obvious. A trader trying to argue with the market until the market agreed with him. One re-entry at a time. Failure number 2, asymmetric exit timing. This is the 11 versus 31-minute gap from months 5 through 8, and it's the single most expensive habit in the entire 11-month history. More expensive than any individual bad trade. Cutting winners early caps the upside of a strategy that was designed to let winners run. Holding losers late extends the downside of a strategy that was designed to cut losses quickly. Neither decision happens because Jake forgot his rules. Both happen because in the moment, protecting a small profit feels urgent, and admitting a loss feels optional, and those 2 feelings pull in exactly the wrong direction for the math to work. Run the arithmetic on that alone. If your winners average a smaller move than your losers, simply because of how long you sit in each one, you can have a win rate above 50% and still watch the account slowly bleed out, month after month, without ever taking what looks on the surface like a single bad trade. Failure number 3, daily loss limit negotiation. The stated rule was 1% maximum daily loss. On the 4 occasions that limit actually got hit in the first 4 months, the log shows Jake had already mentally reframed the number before the day started, telling himself the real limit was 1%, but I can flex if the setup is clean, which is a rule with a built-in escape hatch. A rule with an escape hatch isn't a rule. It's a preference that occasionally gets honored. Failure number 4, strategy tinkering as a substitute for execution repair. Between months 4 and 7, Jake adjusted his entry filter 3 separate times, each time convinced the previous version was the problem. He added a volume confirmation in month 5. He removed it and added a different moving average cross in month 6. He tightened his entry window to the first 90 minutes of the session in month 7. Looking at the actual data, the entry filter was never the leak. Win rate barely moved across any of these 3 versions, staying inside a 5-point band the entire time. The leak was happening after entry, in how positions got managed once they were live. Tinkering with entry criteria felt productive because it was something concrete to change, something he could point to and say, I fixed something this month. It didn't touch the actual problem, because the actual problem lived entirely in the exit behavior, not the entry logic. And no amount of entry refinement was ever going to show up in a column the entry filter had no connection to. Failure number 5. No separation between the funded account and his identity. Every red day in the first 6 months produced a version of Jake that questioned whether he belonged on a funded account at all. Whether the firm had made a mistake funding him, whether the 2 failed evaluations before this account were the real signal and the funding itself was a fluke. That identity threat is what turned an ordinary losing trade into an urgent problem that needed to be immediately fixed through a re-entry, instead of an ordinary and expected part of a strategy with a 50-something% win rate. When a loss threatens who you think you are, you will always try to resolve it faster and more emotionally than the math actually requires, because the goal in that moment quietly shifts from manage this trade correctly to prove I deserve to be here, and those 2 goals almost never point in the same direction. Now here's what specifically changed between month 8 and month 10, because this is the part almost never shown in best month content. The boring middle where the actual repair happened, 2 months before the highlight reel. Change 1, Jake started using a fixed preset target and stop on every single trade entered into the platform at the same moment as the entry order, not adjusted afterward. This sounds almost too simple to matter, and that's exactly why it worked. By setting both exit points before the trade was live, he removed the in-the-moment negotiation entirely. There was no decision left to make once the position was open, which meant there was no window for the asymmetric fear versus hope response to insert itself. He described it afterward as the difference between driving a car with a steering wheel and driving one where the wheel only worked for the first 10 seconds after you started the engine. Once you were moving, the direction was already locked in, for better or worse. And that removal of ongoing control turned out to be the fix, not a limitation. Change 2. He built a rule specifically for re-entries. No re-entry on the same setup within the same session. Full stop regardless of how clean the next signal looked. This directly targeted failure number 1. It didn't ask Jake to feel differently about a loss. It removed the option that his nervous system kept reaching for, which is a much more reliable fix than trying to think your way to different feelings in real time. The rule wasn't complicated. It was 1 sentence taped, almost literally, to the top of his trading platform. 1 setup, 1 attempt, 1 session. Change 3, he moved his daily loss limit rule out of his head and into his broker platform as an actual hard block that locked the account after the threshold was hit. This closed the escape hatch from failure number 3. It's the same principle as a bartender cutting off a customer's tab. The limit stops being a personal negotiation and becomes a mechanical fact, enforced by something other than willpower in the moment. Before this change, the daily loss limit existed only as a number he'd written down and trusted himself to respect. After this change, it existed as code, which doesn't get talked into an exception at 10 o'clock on a rough morning, the way a person does. Change 4, he stopped adjusting entry criteria entirely for 2 full months, and instead logged every trade's hold time for winners versus losers, which is what actually surfaced the 11 versus 31-minute gap in the first place. He couldn't fix a problem he hadn't measured, and he'd spent 7 months adjusting the 1 variable, entry criteria, that the data eventually showed wasn't broken at all. Change 5, he separated his identity from his daily P and L by tracking a second number alongside profit and loss. A simple execution score, whether he followed every rule exactly, independent of whether the trade won or lost. On the days his execution score was perfect but the trade lost, he started treating that as a successful day, which sounds strange until you realize it's the only way to stop a normal losing trade from feeling like an emergency that needs an immediate emotional fix. Notice what's missing from that list of 5 changes. No new indicator, no upgraded data feed, no new mentor, no expensive course. Every single change was a removal or a mechanical enforcement of something that was already written down in month 1. The best month wasn't built. It was uncovered once the behaviors sitting on top of an already adequate strategy finally got stripped away. Here's the identity shift underneath this whole case study. Because it applies far beyond futures prop trading. Jake spent his first 8 months thinking of himself as someone building a strategy, which meant every rough stretch triggered strategy-level panic. Tweak the entries, add a filter, find the missing piece. The actual unlock happened when he started thinking of himself as someone auditing his own execution of an already built strategy, which is a completely different job. A strategy builder asks, "What's wrong with my system?" An execution auditor asks, "Where specifically did I deviate from the system I already have, and why?" Those 2 questions send you looking in completely different places. And only one of them would have ever found the 11 versus 31-minute gap. This distinction matters especially in prop trading, where the funded account structure itself quietly encourages the wrong question. Firms evaluate traders on outcomes, profit targets, drawdown limits, consistency rules, and the natural response to a bad outcome is to assume the system that produced it needs to change. But an evaluation failure or a rough month tells you almost nothing about whether the strategy is broken, and quite a lot about whether the person running it deviated from it under pressure. Jake's own trade log proves this directly. The strategy that failed twice in evaluations and struggled for 8 months inside a funded account is, on paper, nearly the same strategy that produced the best month. The system was never the variable that moved. The execution auditor question would have found that 7 months earlier than the strategy builder question did. This is also why best month ever content is almost always misleading, even when the numbers are completely real and completely verified. It implies a discovery, a breakthrough, a new insight, a moment of clarity. What it usually is, underneath the verified statement, is the visible tip of a repair that happened quietly 2 or 3 months earlier with no screenshot attached. Because there's nothing dramatic to screenshot about deciding to stop re-entering trades after a stop out. And here's the part of this video that's supposed to feel deflating on purpose. If you're hoping this breakdown ends with a specific entry trigger or a specific stop distance you can copy into your own platform, it doesn't, because that was never the variable that mattered. The most useful thing in Jake's 11 months of data isn't a number you can copy. It's a question you can ask about your own trade log this week. Pull your last 20 trades and check the average hold time on your winners against the average hold time on your losers. If there's a meaningful gap, you've just found your own version of months 5 through 8, sitting quietly underneath whatever your P&L happens to say this month. Most funded futures traders will read that instruction and skip it, because checking it requires admitting the strategy was never the problem. And that's a much less comfortable thing to admit than, "I need a better setup." Jake skipped it for 7 months too. The 11th month didn't happen because he finally found something new. It happened because he finally stopped avoiding something old, sitting right there in his own trade log the entire time, in a column nobody bothers to look at until the account has already survived long enough to matter. There's a reason firms that fund traders talk about consistency far more than they talk about talent. And Jake's own log explains exactly why. Talent shows up in the entry, spotting the setup, reading the structure, knowing the instrument. Consistency shows up entirely after the entry, in the 11 minutes versus the 31 minutes, in the re-entry that never happened, in the daily limit that finally became a wall instead of a suggestion. Prop firms aren't funding the best chart readers. They're funding the traders whose execution looks the same on their worst day as it does on their best. And that sameness is precisely what the last 3 months of Jake's data finally started to show. So before you go looking for what Jake added to have his best month ever, go pull your own trade log first. The subtraction sitting in there might be worth more than anything you'd find by adding one more indicator to a chart that was never really the problem.